farcical, so unpredictable, here on the SNL network.
Yes, welcome on in, everybody, to the Saturday Night Network here for another patron feedback show to wrap up the Jenna Ortega week of Saturday Night Live and look ahead to the Quinta Brunson week coming up at the beginning of April. Only 6 episodes left, and we have a fantastic one, I hope, coming up soon. And I've been really looking forward to this patron feedback show because it is always a pleasure to get to talk to this amazing patron and a wonderful SNL guest. It is Casey Killingsworth. Casey, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. In this season of SNL, when it came back from Christmas, it came out hot, got off to a really strong mid-season start. It's been a little bumpy road, been a little rocky in the middle, but I think we're on the right path. And yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Let's dive right in and start talking about this episode a little bit, Casey. So, like you said, I mean, I think you sort of felt the way that I felt about the season, which is that we had a really great run going and then we hit a major stop for a little bit and it's been bumpy over the last few episodes. But how did you feel about what we got to see this week with Jenna Ortega and the 1975?
I thought Jenna Ortega was the strongest host of this 3-week run of shows. She really brought the right energy that the show needed. Yeah, just just a young actress who's making her big break and putting herself out there, has really proved herself, who's earned her shot to be on the show. And that's good to see after Woody kind of, well, I wouldn't say disappointed us, but left us kind of baffled. And Travis Kelce, yeah, he was strong, but it's nice to see someone with some training in acting and comedy host a show again. And they really knew how to use her and play to her strengths as a performer. And I really like what we got this week.
Absolutely. Do you think, like, a few years down the road, you would want to come back and rewatch this Jenna Ortega episode?
Yeah, sure. I mean, if not the whole thing, just at least some sketches of it. I mean, I'd watch it if it played on SNL Vintage at 8 or 9 o'clock where I live in a year. So I think it'd definitely be worth rewatching, and I think she'd be worth bringing back a second time as a host.
What were those sketches that really stood out to you that you would want to see on a rewatch?
The ridiculousness sketch I thought was really funny.
Ooh, this is a hot take. Okay, tell me why.
I just it was the first, like I said in my blog, it was like the first sketch that really got me on board with that whole episode. Just it felt like something they should have did in like season 40. Like kind of did this in season 42 with Kristen Stewart, but they added just an extra layer of strangeness of it, and it showed like they really knew Jenna's acting range, how to use her, and it showed that they really played to her strengths as a performer. And the X-Men sketch was pretty funny too. That grew on me. Just more strong performances. And just
I
off the
love this, by
top.
the way, Casey, because I think that the ridiculousness sketch was my personal least favorite of the night. And I just, I respect and admire your SNL brain and your memory for, sketches from decades ago and really being able to like compare and make references and all that stuff. So I have to just inquire a little bit more. What was it about that sketch that worked so well for you? It was just that it was so weird.
Just this weirder, darker edge to it that I mean, it showed they knew how to tap into Jenna Ortega's strengths from like they saw her on Wednesday and in Scream, and it felt like the first thing that really played into like her penchant for just odd, moody horror roles. And it was the first thing that really suited her that night.
See, I love that. I didn't even think of that. That's a great point. I mean, if I understand correctly, when I'm watching that sketch and when I go I always go back and watch these episodes a few times. When I go back and watch it, basically what you're saying is like we're so used to seeing Jenna in roles where she's playing the kid that's like looks great on the outside, but on the inside is like evil and twisted. And that's really what Wednesday Addams is as a character, right?
Yeah, like they played into that better than they did at the Exorcist sketch, because that, like, the Exorcist sketch was too pandery, too boilerplate. Felt like, oh, we had to do this. She's known for horror. Let's have her play Reagan, and let's bring in Ego Wodum as the lady who's having none of this nonsense. That felt too unambitious for me, but the ridiculousness felt just had that extra layer, and it also I just thought of the Varsity High, the Waffle House pre-take, because that and ridiculousness kind of go hand in hand, because Jenna Ortega is 20 years old, kind of the new young Hollywood it girl. So we were kind of expecting like a young pandery show. I was thinking, oh, they're gonna do another TikTok thing again. Maybe we'll get something different, but they didn't do that. They kind of pulled a bait and switch on us with that stuff. It's like, you think you're getting ridiculousness and you think you're getting just high school teen romance melodrama, when suddenly there's, decapitations and cat ball stories, and then just chaos in the background of a Waffle House while two teens are breaking up. See, that's the type of thing I like to see them do that's different, that just something out of the box like that every once in a while.
Yeah, I love that perspective. I mean, we didn't get to really talk about that sketch all week throughout the podcast, so it's great to get to do that. And going down the rundown, I think, like, if you like that sketch, then a lot of the rest of the episode really works for you. So I think that positively, this was a great episode, and I'm excited to talk about it and other aspects of SNL in season 48 and what we're going to look forward to. So, Casey, would you like to get into the questions from this week?
Sure, let's do it.
For sure. And if you would like to send in your questions for this show or any other patron feedback show, you can always do that. We post our patron feedback question forms the day before on Twitter and in our Instagram stories. So make sure to do that for the final patron feedback shows of the season throughout the rest of the spring. But for now, tonight, we got some really great questions. And I'll start off with one from my friend Thomas Senna, who wanted to know, as we head into the home stretch of the season, I think that the Jenna Ortega episode might be my favorite so far. Do you think it's a legit contender for best episode of the season so far? And what other episodes do you think are in the mix? So what do you think, Casey?
Well, as much as I like this episode, it was barely made my top 5 of the season. I think the strongest contenders for best of the season would be that December-January run that we got, especially January, because right now my best of the season was the Aubrey Plaza and Sam Smith episode, and the Michael B. Jordan and Little Baby episode was just second behind that. And just that run of shows between Kiki and Steve Martin, Martin Short, and Austin Butler, they would be at least 2 of those would be in my bottom 3. And I do have to admit, this might not be a hot take, but it might ruffle some feathers, but hear me out. I would still say the Dave Chappelle and Black Star episode would be in my top 5 just because of the sketches. I mean, the monologue was very, very iffy, and that even I have problems with it. But the sketches all the way through were really solid. I like what we got sketch wise from Dave, because I've always been a fan of Dave Chappelle when Chappelle's show was kind of big, and I've always kind of struggled with his stand up at times. But if anything, that episode he hosted this season really cemented for me that I was always just a fan of Chappelle's show more than I was of Chappelle's stand-up. And I think part of that is just, my love of SNL from childhood and all other sketch comedy, Mad TV, Kids in the Hall, everything. That just, Chappelle came up at the right time. So, it's been more, like our friend Andrew Dick says, he abides more by, like with Norm Macdonald, he abides more by like sketch norm than update norm. I abide more like sketch Chappelle than monologue stand-up Chappelle, me personally.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with feeling like you like the Chappelle episode. I don't think you're necessarily saying by liking that episode, or anybody would say that like we support everything that Dave Chappelle says or does just because we enjoy his episode. So yeah, I think it was a very good episode and unique in its own way. And I think that this question is a really interesting one from Thomas here because I don't know that it was the best of the season for me. I think that it was certainly a very good episode of the season. But last year, I had a way easier time pointing out which episodes were so great because they were a little bit more few and far between. Like, I think that Rami Malek, Jason Sudeikis, and Kieran Culkin were all very good episodes, but Jason Sudeikis' episode in 47 was clearly outstanding. And then John Mulaney's episode from last season was clearly like fantastic as well. So those two absolutely stood out for me. And I look back at the episodes this season and I'm not like, oh, it's this one that I absolutely gravitate towards. But I do think like in the Stephen Marty episode, there was some really great stuff. Keke Palmer was fantastic as a host. Austin Butler, the episode was really good. Obviously, it's going to always be remembered for Cecily's goodbye. But I really think that Aubrey Plaza episode was probably, overall top to bottom, my favorite of the season, just in terms of just like the, it was so opposite of Woody for me, where like I expected a party for Woody and it was like a complete disappointment. But the Aubrey one was like, yeah, like, people were excited she was going to host and maybe like somebody could show up, but I didn't necessarily expect that like party atmosphere we were going to get to kick off 2023. And I really felt like it was just a huge boom to my experience watching the show this calendar year by having that episode be so strong. And then, of course, Michael B. Jordan, Pedro Pascal were also very good episodes. So I think for me, it's tough to point out in this season where the quality has been much higher than previous years, which episodes were like, sort of stand out above the rest. But I think it's probably the Aubrey one if I had to pick.
Yeah, and I think another thing that made Aubrey Plaza's episode so great, besides just her, having experience in, comedy and drama and having range as an actress and just being someone people want to see because of her work with Amy Poehler, is that just she's like us in that she had a lifelong passion and love of the show. Maybe she had more connections that got her an internship, but yeah, you could tell she wanted to be on this show for a very long time, and she put in the work, just starting out as an intern and basically just stalking Amy Poehler until she just asking her for a job working for her, and then Amy just relented and said, well, you could here's how you apply to become an intern and work with the set department. So she put in the work to someday be on that show. I mean, she auditioned to be in the cast and didn't get it, but she put in the work to get on camera on that show someday, no matter what it took. Even if she was a background extra, her end game was a host, and she got other roles probably to fulfill her own other creative passions. But yeah, she did whatever it took as far as just starting out as an intern and getting all these big, dramatic movie and TV roles you get to be in something big enough to host. So yeah, that played into it too. And she really brought that to the screen, that show.
For sure. Totally agree. All right, nice. Let's take this next question that came in from Jeremy Boulard. And Jeremy asks, which members of the writing staff are having the best season so far? So I think this is a good question, Casey, because, we do talk a lot about who we see on the screen. And yes, there are some writers who do appear on screen naturally, but, it is a good question since we don't get to always talk about the writers, about which ones we feel are having the best season. So do you have a pick here?
Well, I have to say by default, PED, Please Don't Destroy. They're the only writers who get to be on screen and have their own sketches without being in the cast. And maybe connections have something to do with that. I don't know, but yeah, they're the ones who just because they're getting the most recognition and they're putting out the most work. They know how to play the game. They know how to do pre-tapes themselves, and they know how to do live sketches. They know how to play to like you've seen with Sarah Sherman and others. Yeah, they know how to play to the sketch strengths, and yeah, they're even willing to write something that people could take or leave just to get on, just to get out there. And they're already working on their own movie. I don't know if that means they're leaving SNL behind, but they're putting in the work, that grind, to, even if SNL's a stepping stone for them, they're really making the most of their time here by doing what they're doing. So yeah, I have to say PDD are having the best 2 seasons in a row by default.
Yeah, I think it's a great answer and a natural one to give. I think, Colin Jost writing this season has really impressed me, stepping down from head writer and then being put in a position to, focus on update and not have to write something every single week. But he's written a lot of pre-tapes this season that I think are really strong. I would say that Nordwin and DiCenzo, the writers that have wrote, they write most of the monologues. I think they've continued to do a really good job, and they've been involved in a lot of good sketches. And I think Mikey and Streeter have been very solid this season. I've talked a lot this week about Mikey Day and my, like how impressed I am with him in this 7th season of his, which I think is probably, it could be his best season, honestly, just the way that he continues to push himself and put himself in new roles. I think, Streeter probably has a lot to do with that as well, with them being inspired to continue to be creative and put out good work. And they were all over the rundown this week. So for me, I have to shout out that I think they're doing a really good job. I don't feel like I've seen enough from them, and that their writing is stale. And we used to say, like, we know what a Mikey Streeter sketch looks like. I don't feel like we do that now. So I would have to say, give them a little bit of a shout out.
Yeah, definitely. They've been working on the show almost a decade now. So again, they've really been putting in that grind, knowing how to play the game. Mikey's a cast member, and he's been acting in other stuff for years before, like even a decade before he, like Keenan said, he was on Wild 'N Out season 1. That was 2005, 2006. So he's been playing the long game, and I mean, sometimes they've written some stuff that was kind of but they've been putting in that grind and that work too to get the recognition that they deserve.
For sure. All right, let's take this question from Blood Meridian, continuing to break records for longest questions of the season as they continue to send stuff in. So thanks, Blood, for this. When season 48 first started, it felt like Sarah and James's journeys were wildly different, with Sarah being on a hot streak for a majority of the first half of the season, doing a number of very well-received sketches and desk pieces alongside fun support work, while James's season was quieter, with a few utility roles here and there, and basically being the cold open guy, with barely any of his talents being showcased. Then came the second half, which was almost the total opposite for both cast members, as James got at least one major showcase in each of the 6 episodes, with all being well received and some being the more popular ones of the season, becoming also such a vital backbone to the show and a saving grace throughout this half of the season. Sarah, on the other hand, besides her sketch in the Michael B. Jordan episode and a desk piece in Travis Kelce's, feels mostly invisible, and when not being so, was mostly cast in generic, bland roles, such as the majority of her appearances in the aforementioned Travis Kelce episode. What are your own views on both of our sophomore performer seasons so far, and what are your hopes and expectations for both of these in the last few episodes? Thanks as always, and keep it up. So I think Blood did a really fantastic job, discussing our thoughts and views and perceptions of these 2 cast members, which is they have definitely had some ups and downs, though we believe that they are very strong, generational cast members. So how do you feel about them, Casey?
Well, I feel like, yeah, they're both strong performers. They're both some of the best hiring decisions Lauren and company made in the past few years. And I don't think there's any real rhyme or reason or contributing factor as to, one getting on air a lot and the other kind of struggling. I think it might just be just the differences in their style of humor, because, we know Sarah Sherman used to be Sarah Squirm, and she was and still kind of is into a lot of blood and gore, poop and vomit, just Cronenberg body horror, and not a lot of hosts who don't know the cast members that well are going to go for that. And even she's given us a lighter version of that on the show these past seasons. So and James Austin Johnson, I think the show has he's earned his trust from the cast and the writers. At first you'd see, he's the new guy for political impressions. They brought him on to do Trump and Biden, but they're having him do less of that a year and a half, 2 years later, and more of him just doing his own original characters. He's figured out a way to work with Dismukes and writers like Dan Bulla to get his stuff on, his view, his voice literally on. So I think it might be some people just see, compared to Sarah's more extreme tendencies as a comedian, people might see JAJ as more of an affable guy, more of a just a guy who wants to do silly characters, and that's all. So it might just be JAJ having just a more easygoing style of comedy than Sarah, but it also might be maybe determination plays into it, because we've heard about some of the great memorable sketches in SNL history, like Cowbell and MacGruber, and those are things that respectively Will Ferrell and Jorma Taccone have said that they have had to pitch like 5 times to get on the air. And they've been up there, and they're up there with SNL's history. So maybe Sarah has a banger of a weird out there sketch that she's just waiting for the right host to pitch it to. And maybe James does too. Maybe he really wants something to get on. He's pitched it multiple times, and maybe he's done that. So it's just that, and just the luck of the draw, roll the dice. Every cast member has their ups and downs in SNL history when they don't get a lot on one week, and the next week they score their big recurring character that they go on to make like 10 sketches, and they do when they come back to host. So it's just kind of the randomness of the way SNL works, really.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think James's trajectory is slightly more linear in its like ability to follow it. Like I think it's he grows, and then maybe like had a little bit of a sophomore slump at a start to the season that was unexpected, but then he sort of figured it out pretty quickly, and has been really great since then. Sarah's has been certainly more puzzling for me. And I talked about this a little bit on By the Numbers last night, where I'm just surprised, because I feel like, Casey, the concept of a floor and a ceiling, like, it's a sports term that like people use a lot of times. We talk about like the capacity at which that they can achieve versus like how they bottom out.
I'm familiar with that. Yeah.
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. I feel like James's floor is higher than Sarah's floor. So Sarah can like completely bottom out in an episode and appear in like 15 seconds of a given night, which is dangerous, because I think for a cast member like her, it's crucial to have her as an aspect of the show when you have such a talent. Whereas James, I think his floor is so much higher. Like you're going to have James Austin Johnson at least in a couple minutes of the show. So that's what's interesting about the two of them, and why I think that they are so different, even though they came in the same class. Is I just think that James is just so set up so well that like it would be almost impossible at this point for him to like not be in every given show. But Sarah has such a variety in terms of like what you can see from her on a given night. Like we don't know if this is going to be a Sarah night or not. And I was like so wrong about this, over the, that great run. I was like, oh, we finally done it. Like we finally hit it where Sarah is going to have the great nights every single week. And I was wrong. So I sort of feel like the standard deviation between what we're going to get from Sarah is much greater than I thought.
Yeah. So it's also more like the difference in like the types of roles JJ can play and the types of very niche, bizarre roles Sarah can play. Is that also part of it?
Yeah, I think that the point that you made about that is definitely accurate. My question is like, will SNL lean into Sarah more? Because when they have done it, it's been successful. So what's like, why not? Um, I don't know. I guess I would be curious. Like, I think, when we look back on Sarah Sherman's career, which I hope is a very long one at the show, in a few years' time or whatever it is, I hope we're going to say that, like, eventually we just clicked to a point where she was just a regular part of every episode.
Yeah, I mean, so hopefully someday. I mean, they're both still featured players, so they're both starting out. They
But
both
not
got
really though, right? Like,
not
like
really.
they are, but like it's like the most like title doesn't mean anything I've ever seen.
Yeah, but they're both still in that early space in their tenure where
Sure.
they have to prove themselves just a little bit more. And there's no doubt in my mind that they're both going to make it to their third season. It's just that maybe JHA has a bit of a head start now with some of his character stuff he's gotten on. But I think maybe we're waiting for Sarah to finally break through with that one special thing that she may have had hidden in her back pocket that has a little bit more mass appeal, that can really land and go viral, but is still very, very quintessentially Sarah and very unique in her own voice. And it's kind of a delicate balance to strike with her. And who knows how she knows how she's going to pull that off. So I think we're just waiting for that big Sarah breakout moment. That's something that's her that a lot of people like.
Well, last night, Casey, we were talking on By the Numbers about how, Marcelo obviously had like the best week of his career on the show. And part of the reason for that was the expectation that there was going to be so many Gen Z watchers of this show who already knew Marcelo from the TikTok. That they were gonna like, follow him over to SNL. So it was like, I'm not surprised that they open up on the cold open and there he is, where Mario Lopez had no, business being the impression in the cold open, but yet they decided to like find a way to put Marcelo front and center for, 6 minutes or whatever it was. And, I sort of feel like that's what they should be doing with Sarah. Like, people open up the screen on Saturday nights and they expect to see Sarah Sherman. So I feel like they should be putting her front and center. And maybe I'm just, standing too much, but I feel like my hope and expectation, to answer the question, Blood, is that they will figure it out with Sarah, and that, she can take one episode off every now and then, but the last 3 episodes, like this run, was disappointing.
Yeah, I think they've figured this out with Bowen and Ego. So just as long as they can figure out how to, one could say, like you said, people tune into the show, they expect to see Bo and Yang, they expect to see Ego Wodum as they put in the work there. The stars, they're the centers of the show. So as soon as they can find a way to figure that out with Sarah based on what she's got a specific week, I think she's golden.
Yeah. All right, let's take this next question from Eric Godding. Eric asks, now that we are 6 episodes removed from Cecily's departure and the hosts have been 2/3 male, do you feel like the gender balance of the show and its sketches has shifted more male focused than it has in several years?
I definitely say the balance of the show has shifted. I can't say that it shifted to one gender or the other. I mean, it is that is especially a hard distinction to make when they've hired someone like Molly Carney, who was their first gender non-binary cast member in their history. And when that happens, it's hard to tell what they're shifting toward gender-wise, but I feel like now that Cecily and Kate and Adi are gone, I feel like they're shifting away from the big theater kid energy that those girls and Taryn and that like season 40-ish cast brought to the show, the people that weren't the stand-ups of that era. I think we're shifting away from that, but it's been baby steps, because there's less of that vibe, but we don't quite know what vibe or what they're shifting toward next, because they've they've hired so many new people in recent years, and they're excuse me, they're still trying to figure out their own voice, and they're still trying to figure out what they can bring to the show. And yes, the veterans are people who like Heidi, who've been kind of hanging back and have had some breakout sketches, but maybe not to the point where they're the stars of the show or they're carrying the show. I mean, maybe Chloe Fineman is the last remnant of that big theater kid, big female focused era. Maybe she's the last shred of that, but I don't know that that's gonna dominate the show. I mean, maybe with Bo and Yang, it might. Yeah, maybe with Bo and Yang, the tone of the show might shift to more LGBTQIA inclusive, and maybe we're already in that direction. But as far as male female focused energy, it's hard to say, given that the show's in the middle of that shift and figuring out where it's going next.
Yeah, it's a great question from Eric. I really think it gave me a lot of thought, because I do feel like the Kate 80 and Cecily era, what it did feel very female focused, but like part of it is for good reason, right? They did stay on the show a long time, so maybe it felt like there was like an exclamation point on their era, like it was just like so much of it, but for good reason, because there had never been an era like them before. In the entire 40-year history of the show, there had never been a female, focused era. There were really strong female cast members with, Kristen and Tina and Amy, and before that with, Anna and Molly and Sherry and Jan, like Jane. There's so many great female cast members, but there was never ones where we really felt like, the women of the cast were just like on this level that was just above all the men on the cast. It's never been something we've seen on the show. So I think it was so poignant over the last 10 years that it's natural to feel a shift right now. But when I think of male focused or female focused eras, I think that those types of cast members shine above the rest of them. And I don't feel now that the men of the cast shine above the women of the cast. I'm not looking at the men on this list and feeling like, okay, Mikey and Keenan, Andrew, Bowen, I don't feel like they're shining above Heidi or Chloe or Ego. I feel, if anything, it's more even, and it is completely up in the air which cast members are going to be highlighted on a given week. You're going to get a little bit of, all of the repertory players for the most part, maybe minus Punky and Andrew. But I don't feel like this is a male focused or female focused era at this point. I think this is more even. And, with regards to Eric's comment about the host being 2/3 male, obviously, on this podcast specifically, we've always advocated to even that out as much as possible. But in the history of the show, like 70% of the hosts or 65% of the hosts have been male. So it's not like I'm not used to this. So for me, this feels more even keeled and natural, like what the show, not about the host, but about the cast, at least what the show should be, which is that it doesn't feel female focused or male focused. It just feels cast focused. You following me?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean the closest, you mentioned you don't see the men in this cast shining above the women. I mean, the closest I think they can get to that is Bowen, because he's had a lot of standout solo stuff, but I feel like Bowen would shine the best with someone like Ego, or he can only really shine when he's playing off he shines the best when he's playing off the female cast members for me. And yeah, they did start down this trend of like 20, 23, 25 years ago of more female focused humor, especially with the era of Tina, Amy, and Maya and Rachel in the early 2000s. And even before that, you could see the shift with Molly Shannon, Anna Gasteyer, Sherry O'Terry. But yeah, and they never looked back, because they realize that they can't really return to more bro heavy, the more bro heavy style of humor that dominated the Chris Farley, Adam Sandler, David Spade, even early Will Ferrell and Norm Macdonald tenure. They can't go back to that because I just, culturally outside of SNL, we wouldn't be ready for a shift back to that. The show would get canceled in pretty much not just in the Twitter way, but in the literal NBC says you're done way. So
Yeah.
there's no going back, but they still got to figure out a way to move forward.
For sure. And I think you can have duos, right? Like the JJ Andrew duo that's developing, I think is an exciting duo of putting two male cast members together and seeing what they continue to write and put on the show. So for me, I think that's a possibility. And I will just say my only disagreement with what you said, Casey, is that I don't think Fred and Bill Hader and Seth and Andy and Will, those guys, Jason, I don't think that they were the bro humor of the bad boys of Spade and Farley and Sandler and Tim and all those guys, Schneider. But I think that they were very male dominated because, Kristen obviously stood out above the rest, but there was no female counterparts that were strong enough to, besides Kristen, probably to match the quality of the male cast in the late 2000s. So I think that did feel male dominated, but in not in the bro way that you are referring to. So I just want, for any listeners who are listening along, I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, I agree. And like I said, that bro humor is a very early 90s relic. And like you said, Kristen did stand out. So it felt like they had some female representation. There was a balance between male and female humor in there with those days. Is not as much female representation as the previous era, but post Kristen, they figured out a right balance. They could have more, female dominant humor, but a balance between, all the women post Kristen. Because when you look at around season 40, around that era, I mean, besides Cecily, Kate, and 80, we still had Vanessa Bayer, Leslie Jones, Sashir Zameda. And then Heidi came along and Ego came along. So they've balanced it out a bit more. Once they realize that the future of SNL is females, then they've got to figure out the balance to have different types of female voices shine on the show.
For sure. And I think that needed to happen. And I think 20 years down the road, we'll look back on it and be like, this was the women's revolution of SNL, where they really took over the show in that sense. But what we have now, which might be better for the overall quality of the show, is more of an even gender balance in terms of quality of cast member. And I think that is what we're looking for when we're finally going to get that fourth, quote unquote, golden era of the show.
Right. Exactly.
All right, let's take this next question from our friend Ken George Jones. Ken wants to know, recent episodes have had several attempts at political moments, such as Chloe as Emily Kors, Molly as Randy McNally, and those get to Ken anyways, a muted response, while JAJ, brought in through political impressions, receive more positive response for branching out from politics than he has for any of the political material he's had this season. The one political piece to get something of buzz was Bowen as George Santos, and I would question whether that has more to do with Bowen's star power and how huge the Santos story was than it does with any of the material itself. Where does this shift leave SNL going into the presidential primaries, again, with, just in Ken's opinion, writers who struggle to write political material and a cast who seems much less interested in throwing themselves into political characters compared to Cecily, Kate, or 80? And are political impressions on SNL now only likely to get a response if the cast member is already a star, rather than the impression helping them to make them into a star? So what do you think of Ken's question? And as always, thank Ken.
Well, thank you, Ken, for the question. And this is something Ken and a few of our mutual friends have been talking about online. And as far back as I remember it, just the history of political humor on SNL, most people pay attention during the elections. And it goes back to, they got a lot of press in around the 90s when Harvey was Bush Sr. and Bill Hartman and then Daryl Hannah with Bill Clinton, and that was not so much just the politics of it all, but they had a strong cast and strong writing that era too. Then in the 2000s with the Farrell and Bush era, it was more just silly characterizations and things, and we saw that with Tina's Palin. It then became more. It became more that, and this was in the era of the Daily Show and Colbert becoming real popular. People were just turning to comedy shows for their news because they thought, oh, the news was a joke, or they needed a comedic take just to process it and get through the times. It just became like the show felt like this was the thing that they were expected to do. It was a thing people tuned into them, partly because they've been a live show going back. So it just became the norm that they were expected to do something on politics, even when they don't have a take or anything to say, just mention it because that's what people want to see. They want to see sketches about it. And they, leaned into it pretty hard with the Trump era, the Alec Baldwin's Trump era. They just felt like it was a lot to keep up with. They felt like they had to do something on everything, just blow through it all, just checklist cold opens, we called them, just mention everything and move on because it was all so much. And the thing me and Ken were talking about during that era is that it felt like there weren't a lot of writers on staff in that era of the Trump presidency that really wanted to write about politics or were that interested in politics beyond just having a silly take or a silly character. And what the show needed was just more, political writers who want to write something about politics that actually has a point and has something to say, and not just making a stand, but having an actual point of view on an issue, something to say, and not just like, these are all the things that happened this week. Trump said this, Biden said this, here's a silly character. So it does seem like the show kind of accepted this about itself. And maybe this is because there's not a whole lot going on with politics right now, but it felt like since we're moving away from the Trump era, the show's they've all agreed to not write as much about politics unless they actually have something to say, because we're not just, the Bowen is George Santos. That was something they kind of snuck on us in a cold open that was about football, not so much about politics. But yeah, that was, we were expecting like Marcelo and makeup as that guy, but they gave us Bowen instead, and that works because what else could he be lying about? He could be lying about not being Asian. He could be lying about not being gay. What else from his past is he lying about? That's just but it's kind of hints of the surface level takes on political things that I see them moving away from. And I see hints outside of some of the ways that they've used JJ's Trump. I've seen hints of the direction that they should be moving toward, and that only write about politics when you have an actual political message and not when you just want to jump in on the moment and strike while the iron's hot. And really, the iron's never hot because everyone will be tweeting jokes about it all week, and there's all the other late night shows. So yeah, they it seems like they've realized they should only write about politics when they have a political point, and not just because NBC or Lauren feels they have to have just a silly character, a cast member playing someone. So I do feel like the show is kind of reconfiguring how it views politics in that direction once these new writers and cast members will be playing these political roles come in.
Yeah, that makes sense. Look, I don't think season 48 was ever going to be about politics. Colin Jost is probably the closest thing in modern times that we have of a writer who, writes political jokes, and I don't think that's like his forte. I think he probably wants to stop doing that now and write more silly things. So I don't think necessarily that they had planned coming into 48 to even, you know, do politics that much, except when it was JJ as Trump or JJ as Biden. And then, Santos was just such a silly, person that they had no choice but to go after it. But I do think, 49 and obviously 50 are going to be much more politically heavy. And that is the trend of Saturday Night Live and of American politics, which is like, if you go back and you watch all the seasons, you'll see like on the off years where there's no primaries, there's no presidential election, things are much less political on the show. So I do think over the summer, new writers that might come on board might be a little bit more politically focused, and that would make sense in terms of hires. And that's something we have to watch for. And I think like you have to expect like, Biden's probably going to rerun. So Democratic, politics over the next couple of years is pretty straightforward up until the actual debates between the, winner of the Republicans primaries and then, versus Biden. But on the Republican side, I mean, the thing is like we're sort of set up for, I know politics is serious and a lot of people, these are real life issues for a lot of people, but just from like a comedic standpoint, we're set up for like some of the craziest stuff we might ever see between DeSantis and Trump and like all the other cast of characters that might end up running on the Republican side. So that's probably going to be the focus of a lot of political cold opens and sketches over the next couple of years. So, I know, and I would expect that SNL is looking for their DeSantis. I think it's a very deliberate choice that Saturday Night Live has made to not have anyone play DeSantis yet, because they don't want, to establish that cast member as the DeSantis, knowing how important that player will be over the next couple of years. So I think we're in a little bit of a holding pattern until these things start to break out and become more pertinent to the show. Saying all of that, I think that the types of politics we've seen this year are so like benign to me, Ken, that I don't really like think about it too much as like SNL's doing a good job with it or not, because it's just so not a part of the story of 48 for me. It's more about like sort of redefining what this era will look like, establishing the new cast members, building what will be the crew going forward over the next several years, and then obviously the eyeballs will turn towards Saturday Night Live on a much bigger level once the politics starts heading back in. And we know that, Casey, because if you go watch the YouTube views on SNL, you'll see that all the political cold opens obviously have the highest views. So politics is always watching SNL. And I think we're going to have a lot more of an answer for Ken and for anyone else who's interested in this once we get going on these primaries and eventually the general election.
Yeah, I agree. And what you mentioned about the political stuff just by itself on YouTube having the most views, that also speaks to what I mentioned about SNL's history, because they have kind of a wide audience. There's some people, young people watching for today's cast that they got them into the show and introduced to it. And there's, older people like our parents and in some cases our grandparents, let's be honest. The older generation, the baby boomers who they don't stay up to watch it live, and they certainly don't do podcasts about it like us, but they just stick with it because it's a show they've known throughout the years, and they mainly want to see what they'll have to say about politics. So you maybe just look on YouTube to see what's political, and maybe the rest of the humor they feel like is beneath them, or just they don't get it, they think they're too old for it. Like I literally have a coworker at my job who I heard say, "Oh, I watch Saturday Night Live. I just watch Weekend Update with Colin Jost and Michael Che. The rest of it's just crap." So that's always going to be a part of their audience. And yeah, and I mentioned, like you said, you did say Colin Jost didn't want to really write about politics, or that was pretty obvious during the Trump era. But now he seems to be more into saving his more pointed and focused jabs about, politicians like Ron DeSantis and even Biden and Trump. He's saving that for Weekend Update, which is one thing that people say the show should do. Oh, if you want to talk about politics, fine, just save it for the weekend update. Just confine it to the actual news. And yeah, I think Jost, now that he has now the stakes are low politically for the show, and he has a clout to do this. He's maybe stood up and said, "Hey, let's save our political takes for weekend update for now, and then we'll while we reconfigure the rest of the show and figure out where America's headed politically and where we're going to follow them politically."
Makes sense. All right, let's take this next question from Fred. Fred says, looks like Dismukes and JAJ have hit it off. What other pairing would you like to see? Better yet, what could be strangely bizarre to see? So do you have another, pick for a good pairing between the cast, and any bizarre pairing that you would pick?
I mean, I'd say Ego and Bowen. Really, Ego and anyone. She just has chemistry with a lot of people. But mainly Ego and Bowen for the purposes of answering this question the way that it was phrased. So I'd say Ego and Bowen is something I like to see more. And a bizarre pairing that we might have seen a little bit of, or might have heard about getting cut at dress, that I'd like to see more of that'd be strange, would be Sarah Sherman and Chloe Fineman. Just because Sarah could be in a pairing with anyone and it would work great. But I'd like to see more of her and Chloe together, much more than I'd like to see Chloe and Heidi together, because Chloe Heidi pairings haven't worked that well for me. But yeah, Sarah and Heidi would work great together, but mostly even Ego and Sarah would be my dream pairing. But just really Ego and Bowen, Ego and Sarah and Chloe, even Sarah and Heidi, just to see how that would work. But mainly just any combination of Ego and Sarah, whether it be them together or each of them with someone else.
Those are great picks. I think, two pairings we heard about prior to the season, which we really haven't seen on the show, but I think could potentially be a part of the future of the show, would be Andrew Dismukes and Michael Longfellow. I think that would be a pairing that, they've obviously worked together in the past outside of SNL, and would be great to see them together on the show more. And the other one would be Molly Carney and Sarah Sherman. I would love to see them together. I think those are pairings that make sense, and that, given the opportunity, could really stand out on the show. So that would be fun to me. And then, maybe a little bit of a bizarre pairing, but one that we saw recently was Mikey Day and Punky Johnson, just this pairing that we didn't expect to see on Weekend Update, but maybe we could see them in sketches together. Considering Mikey's ability to stretch himself, I would love to see what he could do with Punky. So I think those would be my picks.
Yeah, those are all great picks, and I'd like to add Longfellow and Marcella would be a good pairing, just because it makes the most sense, because they came up together the same year, so they're kind of bros from the same featured cast of that title. Again, that title didn't mean anything, but yeah, two guys from the same year came up together and just seem to have, if not similar sensibilities, just the sense that they could play well off each other. That I'd like to see too.
For sure. Okay, next up, we got a question from Curly Joe. Curly asks, will the strike affect non-sketch pre-tapes? Example, like the host and musical guest portion of the opening credits or the next week promo. What do you think of that, Casey? Any speculation?
I mean, the most I would think would be whoever hosts, April 8th and 15th and in may just have to have just still photos of themselves in that part of the credits, like they did in pre-season 42. Maybe just go to still photos. I know their photographer, Mary Ellen Matthews. I don't know if she's that closely associated with the post-production unit, but yeah, still photos. And maybe as far as like next week's host announcements, they could either stick to just posting them on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, just social media, and not announce them during the show. Just announce them through press releases and social media, or go back to what they did in at least the first 10 seasons of the show, if not the first 12 or 13, where instead of having title cards in the middle of the show, they used to have Don Pardo do this, now just have Daryl Hammond do it. Just say, next week, it's at the very end over the credits, just announce vocally, next week, this host and this musical guest will be on the show. Just at the end over the credits, this is Daryl Hammond saying goodnight. So those might be their only options, really.
Yeah, I think one area that might be affected will be the pre-produced promos that we've been getting this season, the ones that come out on Wednesday, where we get like a sort of like a mini commercial with the host arriving at the show. Those could potentially be affected. I still think they would do the like, hi, I'm Jon Schneider and I'm hosting Saturday Night Live this week with musical guest Casey Killingsworth. Like, I think like that one will probably still happen. And the reason is because those are not meant for you see them on social media, but they're not really meant for social media. They're actually meant for the NBC affiliates, where they can have them as commercial time to promote the show. I think they would probably still find a way to do those. But yeah, I mean, I think it's all a little bit up in the air, Curly, to see what's going to happen here. We haven't gotten any news yet that, progress has been made. It could be a very last minute thing if things come together. But if not, we're sort of headed towards a very interesting show on April 1st. And again, I want to reiterate, our support goes with the film unit and hoping that they get properly compensated. But I will say, from a storyline perspective, a lot of question marks, and we'll create a very interesting analysis of what we're expecting to get on April 1st.
Yeah, I agree. And they did. I mean, during COVID, they went like two whole years without those pre-produced cinematic promos that started between 16 and 19 from seasons 42 to mid 45. So, I mean, no big loss there. We've seen the show without them, but just those live promos work, and just still photos and just host announcements, just if they're in text form, just on social media, and just have Daryl Hammond announce them at the end of the show over the credits. That'll keep people like me tuned in just to wait to see who's hosting. And
they would actually have to air the full credits though, Casey, for that to work.
They could do a combination of both. They could just announce them on social media in case they have to cut off the credits for whatever reason.
For sure. Okay, next question came in from Anonymous. Anonymous asks, should we boycott the April 1st show if a strike is approved? Casey, are you going to boycott the April 1st show?
I haven't decided yet. I do hope, again, like you said, we do support all the unions that work on SNL, be they writers, be they editors, be they crew members, film directors, producers, anyone in a union. We at the Saturday Night Network support you and what you do, and you should be compensated fairly. But we do hope that they negotiate with NBC to get what they're bargaining for. But it's a personal choice, really, and
sure.
I'm kind of weighing it out because without getting too much into my own personal life, I've had to actually do something similar at my own job for similar reasons to what the post-production unit is doing. So if I watched live on April 1st, I'd feel like kind of a hypocrite. But then again, a lot of people posted on social media like, well, I'm not gonna watch when they have Donald Trump host, or Elon Musk host, or Kim Kardashian host, or Dave Chappelle host. Now people stage their own, have announced that they're going to stage their own personal boycott of the show for a week because they really don't like who the host is or the type of person they are. But they could have watched next week. And I've watched all those shows, just putting the host aside, just out of a love of the show, and just seeing how not to say how the show will weather the storm, but how the show could survive that week, getting through a week with not a difficult host for them, is just a controversial lightning rod of a host. So honestly, it's up to you. It's your own personal choice, and I would like to think you can still watch the show while still supporting unions. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, at worst, you're just giving NBC ratings and not your money. You're not giving them your financial support, just your viewership. But it's to each their own on this, really, and you just got to think about how it affects you and just how you feel about the situation.
for sure. I mean, like, I think you can separate those two things. I don't judge anyone who decides not to watch the show. I think even when it comes to our podcasters and different personalities on the network, if they choose to not watch this show, that is completely up to them. I hold no requirements of them watching it unless they want to come onto the podcast and talk about that particular episode. Then obviously, then I would need them to watch the show. But for me personally, I have to watch the show. This is my job. I mean, I'm here to talk about Saturday Night Live, and very blessed that the patrons and that our YouTube channel growth and the growing of this podcast has allowed me to do this on a more full-time basis. And I'm sort of like in it to see what happens. As long as there's an episode, I sort of have to be there. And our relationship with NBC as a podcast is a very good one. We're very fortunate that we have regular communication with people at NBC and cast members and crew and all of that stuff. And I just would like to be able to support them, but also understand that we're here to document what went on. And if a show does go on, we still need to be able to talk about it. And if you're not comfortable with watching the show and you want to come on, to watch our podcast talking about it so you understand what the sketches were and what people thought about them, that's okay. Like, I mean, I know I'm sort of pitching people to come here, but you're not giving NBC a dime by coming to support us and watch the podcast that week. So I would hope that if you don't watch the show, but you enjoy the podcast, you don't tune out of our podcast that week. And we'll try and maybe be a little bit extra explanatory in terms of the sketches that week in case you decided not to watch.
Yeah. Now, just to be clear and remind everyone, it's just the post-production film units, the editors that are set to strike on
Right.
April 1st now. And again, the writers are set to renegotiate their contract in late April, early May. And that could potentially be another strike. Now, if the writers go on strike again, like they've done in the past, then
That would stop
the decision to watch or not watch would very much be made for you. There'd be no show
Right.
to watch. But
Yeah.
it did remind. We lived through the season 33 WGA 0708 writer strike, and I remember that era. Not just SNL, but the late night shows like Conan, David Letterman. They all went on strike for November, December of 07. But Conan worked out a deal and Jon Stewart and a couple of those guys worked out a deal to come back in January, February of 08, and the strike with the writers hadn't been resolved yet. So they had to do the show without writers. And one thing that stood out to me was Conan with a beard that my sister said made him look like a leprechaun. Conan said on the air during those early 08 shows that our writers are still on strike, but we support them and we hope they're getting everything they're bargaining for. So yeah, you can still watch a show that has staff going on strike and not count it against your support, going the support for that union that's striking and them getting what they, because you can separate those two things pretty easily. But again, that's up to you.
Totally agree. Great point, Casey. And we will keep you posted about what is happening with that potential strike. So we will see. Okay, let's turn our attention to some stuff in the future. We have a question from Manette who wants to know, will John Mulaney host SNL this season? Do you want him to host? So, Casey, we're on Mulaney watch. Only 5 potential episodes left for him to continue the streak. Do you think we're going to get a Mulaney 6?
This is like the second year in a row I found myself on one of these patron feedback shows talking about what's John Mulaney going to do. And personally, I think I could live without seeing him hosting for a sixth time. Part of me is thinking, well, he could do something with Michael Longfellow, Marley Carney, Devin Walker, Marcel Duran. He could do something with those people to help get them on the air, and he did do something with Sarah Sherman, but that's more of the 2018, 2019 Mulaney than the Mulaney we saw host in the early 2020s. Just sad to say, it seemed like Mulaney has kind of, with all due respect to John Mulaney, he's a talented writer, but he settled into a little bit too much of a complacency for me. And I mean, he's a five-timer. I think he should pack it in. He can. I'm sure the show's happy. Lauren's happy to have him back whenever he wants, and he can return whenever he wants. But maybe Mulaney should take a full season off from at least one season off from hosting before he becomes back. And I do. Me and Ken were talking, and I do see if a potential writer strike happens that would end the season on April 15th. They may want to go with John Mulaney as just a safe security blanket of a host to make sure the show ends on, not so much a hot streak, but just like a warm blanket, something that will leave people with something they're familiar with, something they like seeing. But I could go either way on it, really. And Mulaney did really defy our expectations a year ago when he hosted, mainly because he did do some creative stuff. I mean, and he talked about his personal life in a way that was what's the word I'm looking for? He talked about his personal life in a way that it was surprisingly funny and not too much about himself. But yeah, and they didn't have Pete there to talk about Kanye, but that was probably for his own personal safety /
What a different time that was.
Yeah, and they did go there, and that was the start of the war in Ukraine, and they went the safe route by doing a somber song cold open. So they made the right combination of safe choices and creative choices when Mulaney hosted last time, and they could pull that off again. But if he does host, I'll tune in. But if he doesn't, I wouldn't mind. I'm kind of on the fence about Mulaney personally. John, what do you think?
I think that I wouldn't be upset if we had a little bit of a break from John Mulaney. I think it's always fun to get these John Goodman-like streaks and potentially have this is like a very rare occurrence in modern times to have somebody host this often in this short a time. But I do think that Mulaney's episode was surprisingly outstanding. Like, he has brought greatness to the show before, but it was like on a trajectory that I didn't expect it to be like as amazing as that episode was last season. And I think that it could potentially be in our best interest to end on a high for a little bit and then build the hype around the return of Mulaney in 49 or 50, because he is like a very important young modern day host of like, he's a renowned host that we don't always get in modern times. And I think like when it comes to talking about celebrating the history of the show and what hosts we might get in season 50, I think it makes sense that John Mulaney is one of those. So if we don't see him between now and then, I wouldn't be upset about it.
Yeah, and I mean, he did say he is an important host in modern SNL history. I'll say a lot of young people gravitated towards him, and then, recent developments in his personal life, divorcing his wife and having a baby with Olivia. People felt like they trusted him, and then they felt like, oh, he's not really the safe guy to look up to that we thought he was. And I think him sharing a stage with Dave Chappelle at one point, bringing him as a surprise guest on his tour, really cemented that for a lot of people. But again, that is a personal thing.
Yeah, but I mean
But
more like on the show, Casey. Like I
right,
feel like he's just like an important host. Yeah, in modern times. Like I don't think that there is like maybe besides Paul Rudd, I don't think that there's like a five-timer in the last few years that like I would consider like a modern five-timer that's going to continue to return to the show that we expect to be around. And I think like he's like the 40s of SNL. He's like that era's host, you know?
yeah, and he can't separate his personal drama from the show when he's on the show, and
Sure.
bring the funny and give us creative sketches still. So yeah, I wouldn't mind him hosting again, but it's he can take a break if he wants.
I also think he's sort of like gonna be like the Hanks of the future, where like when SNL like needs a guy to be like the host of hosts, to like Hanks was the guy when we had a Omicron episode, when we had a at home episode to welcome us in. Like I think he's like the future of that, where when SNL like needs a host to like come in to do something special, I think that's Mulaney. So at least as long as they feel like they can trust him, and I think that's the case right now. So as long as he's doing better, he's in a good place and he continues to grow and work and do great things, I think that he's the future of that.
Right, and I agree in that first at home episode they did a tribute to Hal Wilner, the musical director who's been there 40 years, and they brought in a ton of former cast to literally sing his praises, and Mulaney was a part of that. Him and Hader and Armisen gave this very beautiful, moving tribute to him. And I can't remember the last time I've seen the show give that in depth of a tribute to a cast member, a staff member who and it felt like the whole reason they were doing these at home episodes at the beginning of COVID was in his honor, and Mulaney was a part of that. So yeah,
Fair
he
point.
cemented his place in the history of the show, and they trust him to represent his part of that history.
All right, let's get to our last couple of questions from this week. Nick Store asks, Nick keeps seeing Pedro Pascal and Oscar Isaac together and think they'd be a fun hosting pair together to come back for SNL. Do you have another pair that would make a good hosting duo, very similar to like we saw Marty and Steve earlier this season? So Pedro Pascal and Oscar Isaac for you, or another pair that you think of, Casey?
They would work. I mean, other pairs I've thought of, Jenna Ortega and Aubrey Plaza.
Yeah,
They're
that could be
both
fun.
similar people. They're both similar actresses, and they've hosted strong episodes recently. So imagine what they could do playing off each other. I'll say Michael B. Jordan and Sterling K. Brown, both Black Panther co-stars who hosted really strong episodes in their, like, my personal top 5 episodes of their specific seasons. And just so I'm not totally picking people who've been on the show before this season or last season, I'm going to it might be a missed opportunity now, but I'm going to put this out there. Daniel Radcliffe and Weird Al Yankovic. And in case you don't know, Al wrote and produced, he didn't direct, but he wrote and produced his own fake biopic for the Roku channel called Weird the Al Yankovic Story. And he handpicked Daniel Radcliffe to play him, but a young 80s version of him with glasses and a mustache in that movie. And he did a phenomenal job. He brought the right energy to the role, and it was a great movie. Check it out if you can. But that's another pairing I'd like to see, but maybe I'm a little bit biased.
Yeah, I wouldn't hate seeing Jason Sudeikis and Brett Goldstein together coming up for Ted Lasso. So that could be a fun one that I thought of. But yeah, totally agree with your picks, Casey. Always great. I don't think we're getting another duo this season. I think it's very rare when we get them. It's like a once every few seasons thing. So could be fun. And we did have a lot of fun discussions about that on the Marty and Steve week. All right, let's take this last question from Donald Dominguez. Donald and Dominguez said, what's your goal for the season as we wrap up with the next 6 shows? So any goals of yours, Casey, that you would like to see from the show?
Well, my main goal is to, first of all, for the show to finish the season working out deals with their writers and their post-production editors union to get them paid fairly, get them what they want, because I think they're making reasonable requests. And my other goal would be, I guess, for the last 6 shows of the season to get some sense, some idea of just where the show is headed going into the next season, because it's a transitional year, and whether that means figuring out what they're going to do about politics, or just having more breakout moments from Devin and Sarah and Longfellow, Marcelo and JJ, and just the new people, just figuring out where they're going, who's going to anchor the show at least until season 50, and just what their general just view of the world is going to be, as far as just topicality and how they approach politics when they have something to say on it.
Yeah, I think my goal for the final six would be I don't want any shutouts in the next six. I don't think it's necessary in a cast now of, less than what we've had last year in terms of size. I don't feel like people like Molly and Andrew should be shut out. I want to see everybody involved. I know some things are circumstantial where just certain sketches get cut, and you can't always plan that out, but that would be my hope. Would that be everything comes together where we get enough of everybody? I would like to see Sarah Sherman return to form. I think that would be very important for me as we start to wrap up the season. And I would really appreciate a really good episode from Andrew Dismukes. I want at least one of these last six to be Andrew focused. So that would be great. Otherwise, going down a list of cast members. I'm really maybe Michael Longfellow, finding his place at the show a little bit more, I think would be good. But otherwise, I feel really good. I think this has been a very strong season of the show. I think we're going to look back, like Casey said, that this was a transitional year, but one that was a very positive transition. I don't feel like we're transitioning into something negative. I think after the season, and we're going to have plenty of time to discuss the season all throughout the summer, I think we're going to be talking about a lot of good things headed into 49. So I'm very thankful that I got to talk to Casey Killingsworth so much this season about, both in the chat and on the podcast a little bit about this season of SNL. And I appreciate all of your thoughts tonight, Casey. So thank you for joining us.
You're welcome, John. It's always great to talk to you too. And I hope to be back on here just at least after the start of season 48. But I always look forward to it. I'm always glad to support the Saturday Night Network any way I can.
Absolutely. Well, Casey, please tell the listeners where they can find out everything that you are doing.
Well, you can follow me on Twitter at Killingsworth27. I'm on Instagram, CaseyK27. Not really posting there, but I am active on Twitter, and I am tweeting links to my blog now. And I'm posting them in the Discord, and so you'll Twitter and Discord mainly. But I am doing something very special with my blog this year. So I was talking to our friend Blood Meridian in the DMs on Twitter, and he said it was the 1-year anniversary of his blog, and I casually mentioned that this year, specifically this January 2023, when I made a special post when I thanked you and our friend Andrew Dick and Blood Meridian, a lot of people. This year, 2023, is the 10th anniversary of the start of my blog. So Blood Meridian convinced me to do something special for that. I've been blogging for 10 years, but I've been writing reviews for now defunct message boards for about 15. So my first 4 years of reviews are just lost to the history of time. Thank God I wasn't that good of a writer then. But my reviews of the past 10 years are on my blog. And since it's been 10 years, I'm doing this thing where I'm inviting you, my longtime readers, to be a part of it. I had Blood Meridian asked me if he could do a special tribute to me, so I let him write his own guest blog, or his guest post on my blog. He's the first guest author I've ever had, and I'm also answering fan questions. A couple months ago, our friend Ken George Jones submitted one that I answered on the blog back in January. So if you do want to write a guest post on my blog, or if you want to submit a fan question that you want me to answer, just hit me up in the DMs on Twitter or on Discord, or leave a comment on the blog if you want to be a part of this thing that I've built and maintained over the past 10 years of my life.
Congratulations, Casey. Always amazing getting to read all your thoughts. And I hope that people do reach out to you and get involved. So make sure to find Casey Killingsworth at Killingsworth27, wherever you can find him. So thanks for joining us, Casey. And of course, what we have coming up next is a very fun talk with Daryl Hammond on Monday night. Yes, the real Daryl Hammond joining us on Monday night for an episode of SNL Stories. And one of the great perks of being a patron here was we asked our patrons to submit some questions to Daryl. So Daryl was able to answer some questions from the patrons, and you can continue to send in your questions for SNL Stories guests if you become a patron at patreon.com/the SNL Network. And of course, sign up for these patron feedback shows where we can talk some Saturday Night Live each and every week about the show. So that is a great perk of that. You can find us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram at the SNL Network. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast on YouTube, Apple Podcast, and Spotify. We will also be back for a Superfan takeover the following week and hopefully something else along the way. And then we will be back for Quinta Brunson and musical guest Lil Yachty on April 1st. Hopefully, whether you're watching the episode or not, you'll at least join us. So for Casey Killingsworth and everybody in the chat, my name is Jon Schneider from the Saturday Night Network. We will see you next time, everybody.